Okay, so good morning, good day everyone. So this time our topic is about critiquing a research paper. Actually, I'm always invited as a critic, no, reviewing and critiquing a research, no. So we look forward that we could able to state the definition for research critic, purpose and provide a rationale for completing a research critic, and necessary elements and questions in a research critic. So a research critic actually is an analysis of a research undertaking that focuses on its strengths and limitations. So critiquing is a systematic process for evaluating research studies and the results reported. No? So because again, the purpose of a research critic is to determine whether the findings are usable for use. Okay, so to give us more details about the topic, let us all welcome our presenter. Go ahead, Madam Serrano.
Carmelo. Good morning, classmates. I'm Janeline Serrano, and I'm here to present Lesson 25, Critiquing Research Articles. Learning Objectives. By the end of the session, the student should be able to, number 1, state a definition for research critic. Number 2, state the purpose and provide rationale for completing a research critic. Number 3, list the necessary elements or questions in a research critic. But first, what is an article critic? A critic is a systematic way of objectively reviewing a piece of research to highlight both its strengths and weaknesses and its applicability to practice. Professionals often need to be able to identify best current practice, and the ability to evaluate and use published research is critical in achieving this. As such, it is a skill required in many position descriptions. Next, purpose of article critic. The purpose of article critic is to determine whether the findings are usable for you. Next, why do an article critic? Not all published research is scientifically sound, and results may have little support for their validity and may reflect a bias. Next, 4 key aspects of critic. Number 1, understanding the purpose and problem, while determining if the design and methodology are consistent with purpose. Number 2, determining if the methodology is properly applied. Number 3, assessing if outcomes and conclusions are believable and supported by findings. And last, number 4, reflecting on overall quality, strengths, and limitations. Next, published research. It is useful to have some background knowledge of the publishing process in order to understand published research better. Researchers try to get their research published as a final step in research process. They aim for publication in professional journals to ensure the most appropriate readership and potential for contribution professionals practice. Next, the publication process. Peer-reviewed journals are considered the best for publication because the contents are scrutinized by peers for quality. Briefly, the process involves, number 1, submission of manuscript to the journal. Number 2, the manuscript is reviewed by 2 experts in the field without knowing the author's identity. The reviewers each write a report referring to the article's relevancy, the rigor of the research, and its potential contribution to the profession. The reviewers independently make recommendation as to whether it should be published or requires further work. Number 3, an editorial board then accepts or rejects the paper based on the reviewer's report. And number 4, authors may decide to adjust their article based on the reviewer's report and then resubmit to the same or different journal for further consideration for publishing. The paper will go through the same review process. Next, planning an article critic. In choosing an article to review, consider the following. Who is the target audience? Does it favor a particular research approach paradigm? Is there any editorial board? What are their qualifications? Is the peer review process clearly explained? When was the article published? Is the article's seminal piece of research? Take note. Not all publications follow such rigorous procedure before publishing, and not all work that is published is truthful and trustworthy. Next, the structure of research article. Critical reviews for research are systematic. They begin at the title and review each section until the reference list at the end. It is useful to ask yourself questions about the purpose of each component of the article, whether it achieves that purpose. The title. Does the title clearly indicate what the research is about, without being extremely long or short to be informative? Are the variables or theoretical issues started and any relationship between them? The authors. What are the author's professional and academic qualifications? Have they published previously on a similar topic? Next, keywords. Some journals require keywords to help to identify main areas of focus. Next, abstract. The purpose of an abstract is to provide a succinct summary of the contents of the article and is usually 50 to 250 words in length. It should contain enough information to enable a reader to decide whether the article is of interest to them or not. So must be informative. Ask yourself, does it explain the purpose of paper? Does it explain why the research was carried out? What was accomplished? What are the main findings? What is the significance of the research? And last, what conclusions were reached? Next, introduction. The introduction should orient the readers to the study by: number 1, giving a firm sense of what was done in the study. Number 2, introducing the question or problem. Number 3, developing the background of the study. Number 4, stating the purpose and the rationale of the research. Ask yourself, is the research question or problem reachable? Is the problem important enough to justify the research? Is the background of the research relevant to the research question? Next, the literature review. The literature review should be given an overview of available literature which frames or surrounds the problem being researched. It should look at the similarities and differences between the literature, as well as the strengths and limitations. It should illustrate how the current study fits into the existing framework of research or how it fills a gap in the literature. Ask yourself, Is the literature review broad, yet focused on the issue? Is there historical as well as contemporary material to put the area of study into context? Is there convincing evidence to support assertions? Does it fairly represent opposing views? Does the literature review use a theoretical framework? Or last, does it reveal gaps in the knowledge which this research will fill? Next, the aim. The aim must be clearly stated, focus on the main idea, and should convey the main purpose of the study. Ask yourself, do you have a clear idea of what this study tried to achieve? Next, the research design. This section should be clearly state what the research did and how it was done, allowing the reader to evaluate the methods, the consistency, the reliability of the study, its validity, and whether it could be replicated. As a minimum, there should be a brief synopsis of research approach taken. Once the research method is established, the reader can critique the research design for methodological rigor. The method section of the research design usually has subsections which describe the participants, the materials, and the procedure. The details should be sufficient to clearly explain the research design, without excessive detail so that no questions remain. Participants or sample. The number of participants, their characteristics, and the selection process used should be described. Do the participants represent the research well? If any participants did not complete the study, this should be explained. Details such as any payments made to participants and details of major. Demographic information should be made evident. For example, geographical location, gender, age, affiliation with any institutions, and etc. Ethics clearance. The process of obtaining ethics clearance and how ethical standards were maintained should be made clear. Use of apparatus. If any apparatus were used, it should be briefly identified and described and its function in the research explained. If any apparatus were obtained or donated by a commercial source, this must be stated. Next, procedure. Each step in the research procedure should be explained. This includes any instructions to the participants, the formation of groups, and experimental manipulations. Any control features in the research should be stated. Ask yourself, is there a clear rationale for the chosen research approach, methods, or instruments used? Is the research method appropriate for the research question? Was the collection of data appropriate for the research question? Is there enough information concerning the participants? What were the ethical considerations for the research and the participant? Were the methods or instruments described in enough detail? Were any ambiguous terms used? Is the method deemed reliable and valid? Are any limitations of the study discussed? Next, data analysis. This section should contain a summary of data collected and the main results and findings, in enough detail so that the reader can understand how the conclusions that are drawn later in article have been reached. In qualitative research, illustrative examples of data are frequently used. In quantitative data, Individual scores or raw data are not discussed. All relevant data, including that which runs counter to the hypothesis, should be discussed. Tables and figures should be used for clear representation of data. In the discussion section, this data should be discussed in text, not as data. The reader should be made clear as to what the data provided means and why is it important. Ask yourself, were the steps involved in the data or analysis explained the strategy is justified? Was the data analysis rigorous enough to substantive the claims? Were all the data taken into account? If not, why not? Are the presented results relevant to the research question? Do the tables and graphs, if any, make the data analysis clearer? Next, the discussion. In this section, the implications of research results are evaluated and interpreted in relation to the research question. This is where the findings and the selected theoretical framework come together. The discussion should contain a clear statement or support or otherwise the original hypothesis or research question. The results of this study and those of other studies should be discussed, and any suggestions for improvements or further research are made here. There should be no repetitions of points already made in other sections. Ask yourself, have the results been interpreted in relation to the research question and aims? Have the results been discussed with the reference to the research question, hypotheses, if applicable, and theoretical or conceptual frameworks? Have conclusions and or recommendations been appropriately drawn from data analysis? Did the researcher highlight the most important results? Have the results been used to support or refute the results of other studies? And last, how relevant and useful are the results to practice? Next, conclusion. This section should be summarize the main points and indicate the usefulness of the research. It should not include any information. Areas for future research may be suggested. Ask yourself, were the main points drawn out? Were the fresh insights or new perspective on the topic demonstrated? Have any recommendations been made based on the research? And last, were there any suggestions for future research? Next, reference list or bibliography. This should contain a list of all sources referred to in the article. In the case of the reference list, of or all sources actually accessed in preparation for the article. In the case of bibliography, ask yourself, are all sources cited clearly with full bibliographic detail provided? Has a wide range of works in the field been referred to? And last, does the list contain both seminal and more contemporary literature? Done. The reference for this topic was here. Thank you and God bless.
Okay, so again, for many qualified researcher, no, most commonly, it is often quite difficult to grasp what others are referring to when they are discussed the limitations and or strength within a research study. So research texts and journals refer to critiquing the literature, critical analysis, reviewing the literature, evaluation and appraisal of the literature, which are in an essence of the same thing. Okay, so credibility and integrity is very important. Now, there are numerous tools available to help both novice and advanced reviewers to critique research studies. So these tools generally ask questions that can help the reviewer to determine the degree to which the steps in the research process were followed. However, some steps are more important than others, and very few tools acknowledge this. No? So some authors suggest that question in a critiquing tool can be subdivided in those that are useful for getting a feel for the study being presented, which calls credibility variables, and those that are essential for evaluating the research process called integrity variables. Again, credibility variables concentrate on how, of course, on how believable the work appears in focus on the researcher's qualifications, ability to undertake and accurately present the study. The answer to these questions are important when critiquing a piece of research, as they can offer the reader an insight into what to expect in the remainder of the study. However, the reader should be aware that identified strengths and limitations within this section will not necessarily correspond with what will be found in the rest of the work. Integrity questions, on the other hand, are interested in the robustness of the research method, seeking to identify how appropriately and accurately the researcher followed the steps in the research process. And the answer to this question, of course, is how will it help to identify the trustworthiness of the study and its applicability to their field of expertise. Now, in critiquing the research, in critiquing the steps in the research process, a number of questions need to be asked. However, these questions are seeking more than a simple yes or no answer. So the questions are posed to stimulate the reviewer to consider the implications of what the researchers has done. Does the way a step has been applied appear to add to the strength of the study, or does it appear as possible limitations to implementation of the study findings? So research report should be well written, no? Grammatically correct, concise, and well organized. So the use of jargon should be avoided where possible. So the style should be such that it is attracts rather, no, the reader to read on the reader, no. So now, what we're going to consider, no, we need to consider the elements influencing robustness. Now, purpose of the study or research problem, the logical consistency is very important. The literature review is also important, of course, and theoretical framework, no, aims and objective, research question, research hypothesis, sample and sample size is also an important, and always the ethical considerations must be covered. No, when it comes to operational definitions, no, as what we discussed last time, no, we need to consider some research design. Let's say, for example, if research design, let's say, for example, if it is experimental, 2 or more groups. When it comes to sample allocation, random, no. When it comes to features, that is, groups get different treatments. When it comes to outcome, cause and effect relationship. No? If it is quasi-experimental, 1 or more groups, of course, sample allocation, that is random also. And when we say quasi-experimental, this one variable has not been manipulated or controlled because it cannot be. No, usually because it cannot be. And of course, this will be focused on the cause and effect relationship, but less powerful than experimental. And we have also non-experimental type of design. Okay? And so on and so forth. I will share to you actually this Because it's too important. Let's say, for example, during your defense, the all panel, no, or panelists, no, asking about how about your research design? What will be research design? Experimental, quasi-experimental, or non-experimental? When we say non-experimental, either descriptive. When we say descriptive, it's cross-sectional, correlational ba yan, comparative ba yan, longitudinal ba yan? So yun yung mga tinatanong ng panel na dapat aware tayo kung anong ginagamit natin na research design, which is also a part of your chapter 3. Alam naman po natin yan. Post ko lang yung ano. Then of course, when it comes to the methodology, as critic, now what we're going to observe is the validity and reliability. One of the most important features of any instrument is that it is measured that the concept being studied in an unwavering and consistent way, because these are addressed under the broad headings of validity and reliability respectively. No, in general, validity is described as the ability of the instrument to measure what it is supposed to measure, and reliability, the instrument's ability to consistently and accurately measure the concept under the study. No? So for the most part, if a well-established off-the-shelf instrument has been used and not adapted in any way, the validity and reliability will have been determined already, and the researcher should outline what this is. No? However, if the instrument has accepted or adapted in any way, or is being used for a new population, then previous validity and reliability will not apply. Take note of it. No? If the instrument has been adapted in any way or is being used for a new population, then previous validity and reliability will not apply. In these circumstances, actually, the researcher should indicate how the reliability and validity of the adapted instrument was established. And maybe you're asking, Doc, how will be able to establish the reliability of the instrument or the validity? To establish if the chosen instrument is clear and unambiguous, and to ensure that the proposed study has been conceptually well planned and a mini version of the main study referred to as the pilot study should be undertaken before the main study. So sample used in the pilot study are generally omitted from the main study. Following the pilot study, the researcher may adjust definitions, alter the research question, address changes to the measuring instrument, or even alter the sampling strategy. So having described the research design, the researcher should outline in clear, logical, or in logical steps the process by which the data was allocated. All steps should be fully described and easy to follow. Then right after that, what you're going to do is to, if you are the one who assigned to critic, right after methodology, of course, the analysis and result. So data analysis in quantitative research studies is often seen as a daunting process. Much of this is associated with apparently complex language and the notion of statistical tests. So the researcher should clearly identify what statistical tests were undertaken, why these tests were used, and what were the results. A rule of thumb is that studies that are descriptive in design only use descriptive statistics. Correlational studies, quasi-experimental, and experimental studies are inferential statistics. Okay? The latter is subdivided into tests to measuring relationship and differences between variables, because inferential statistical tests are used to identify if a relationship or difference between variables is statistically significant, because statistical significance helps the researcher, of course, not to rule out one important trait to validity, and that it is that result could be due to chance rather than to real differences in the population. Quantitative studies usually identify the lowest level of significance, yung less than or equal to 5% probability, and to enhance readability, researchers frequently present their findings a data analysis section under the headings of the research question. So this can be helped to the reviewer to determine if the results that are presented clearly answer the research question. We have tables, charts, no, and graphs may be used to summarize the results and should be accurate. Be used to summarize the results and should be accurate, clearly identified, no, and enhance the presentation of results. So the percentage of the sample who participated in the study is an important element in considering the generalizability of the results. No? At least 50% of the sample is needed to participate if a response bias is to be avoided. Then, of course, the discussion, the conclusion, and recommendation. Okay? So during this area, no, let's say, for example, if you are the critic, no, one of the assigned critic, no, of the research presentation or paper, so the discussion of the findings should flow logically from the data and should be related back to the literature review, thus placing the study in context. If the hypothesis was deemed to have been supported by the findings, the researchers should develop this in the discussion. But if the theoretical and conceptual framework was used in the study, then the relationship with the findings should be what? Okay, so when theoretical and conceptual framework was used in the study, then the relationship with the findings should be explored. No? So any interpretation or inferences drawn should be clearly identified as such and consistent with the result. Then the significance of the findings should be stated, but this should be considered within the overall strength and limitation of the study. So again, in this section, some consideration should be given to whether or not the findings of the study were generalizable, also referred to as external validity. Not all studies makes a claim to generalizability, but the researcher should have undertaken an assessment of the key factors in the design, sampling, and analysis of the study to support any such claim. Finally, the researcher should have explored the difference, of course, it depends upon your field of specialization, significance and relevance of the study. Applying findings in practice should be suggested with caution and will obviously depend on the nature and purpose of the study. In addition, the researcher should make relevant and meaningful suggestions for future research in the area or in the field of specialization. Again, don't forget to look into the references, especially if you are critiquing a research. No? The research study should conclude with an accurate list of all the books, journal articles, reports, and other media that were referred to into the work. No? The reference materials is also a useful source for further information on the subject being studied. And of course, again, to summarize, no, and to conclude my the discussions related to critiquing, because maybe somebody asking, oh my God, my paper was critiqued by an expert, no, because the process of critiquing involves an in-depth examination of each stage of the research process. It is not criticism. Again, it is not criticism, but rather an impersonal scrutiny of a piece of work using a balanced and objective approach, the purpose of which is to highlight both strengths and weaknesses in order to identify whether a piece of research is trustworthy and unbiased. So as in your field of your practice, it is becoming increasingly more evidence-based. It is important that care has its foundation in sound research. It is therefore important that all field have the ability to critically appraise research in order to identify what is best practice. Okay, many qualified and students have difficulty understanding the concept and terminology associated with research and research critic. So the ability and critically read research is essential if the profession is to achieve and maintain its goal to be evidence-based. A critic, again, is a piece of research, is not criticism of the work, but an impersonal review to highlight the strengths and limitations of the study. It is important that all researchers have the ability to critically appraise research in order to identify what is the best practice. Okay, so I think that's it. Or this that.